God's word for our meditation this morning comes from our gospel reading. I'll reread a couple verses again. But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God." This is God's word. Do you have a version of A Christmas Carol that is your favorite? Which version of Ebenezer Scrooge is the one that you like the most? Which one do you put in the TV and watch as a family around the holidays? In my research on Wikipedia, I found probably about 50 of them that you can choose from, such as the Mickey Mouse version with Scrooge McDuck. You have the one with Patrick Stewart. You have the animated one with Jim Carrey, or my personal favorite, A Muppet Christmas Carol with Michael Caine. But no matter which version of A Christmas Carol you like the most, the story remains about the same. At the beginning of the movie, or of the book, the story, you see a grumpy Scrooge sitting there hating Christmas and humbugging everyone and everything. And then one night, as he's sitting alone in his house, he's greeted by Marley, his old business partner, who warns him that if he continues with his greed and his way of life, that he will end up in chains in the afterlife. And then that very same night, he's visited by 3 different spirits, the ghosts of Christmas past, present, and future. And they visit him to show him his ways and that he should change. And I hope I'm not spoiling this for anybody. If I am, you can just plug your ears till I'm done with the introduction. So the ghost of Christmas past shows up. And then we see that Scrooge was not always the way he was in the present. He used to be this nice young man who had his head on straight and fell in love with a young woman named Belle. And they wanted to start a family together. And we don't see the greed right away, but soon we see that he was so concerned about his wealth and his future that that's what consumed his mind. And eventually Belle left him. And then after that, he led a very desolate and greedy life by himself. Then he was visited by the ghost of Christmas present, who showed him that his greed did not only affect himself, but it affected those around him, especially his co-worker or his partner now, Bob Cratchit, and how he was not able to help his son, Tiny Tim, who was dying because of the greed of Scrooge. And then the ghost of Christmas future comes and shows him what will happen if he continues in this life of greed. That Tiny Tim will die, and that he himself will die, and not a soul's going to care. In fact, everyone's going to be happy that he dies, because then they get to take all of his wealth, because as we heard today, you can't take it with you. It's just left for someone else. And so when Scrooge wakes up from this very eventful night, we see that he changes. He learns his lesson. He gives his wealth to those around him and shares in that happiness, and it changes him for the better. Now, Charles Dickens wrote this story, and it does a very good job of showing us what can happen when greed takes control of our hearts, but he did not come up with this idea. We see Jesus making his way to Jerusalem, as we've been talking about, and a crowd of thousands was following him and learning from him. And today, as Jesus was sitting there, someone in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Now, to the man who asked this question, or this statement of Jesus, he may not have thought that he was being very greedy. And I think seldom do people realize that they are being greedy, because maybe they think it's a very savvy business decision. Maybe they think it's going to help them in the future. And so maybe this man thought that he deserved or maybe earned a portion of this inheritance. But whatever his reason for demanding this of Jesus, Jesus tells him, "I'm not the one that's going to judge this matter. That's not my place. but Jesus knows what the greed is doing to this man's heart. Sure, these brothers may be together now, but he knows the greed of this inheritance will surely divide them forever, because that's what greed does. And so instead of taking this very specific issue about greed, Jesus uses this as a springboard to talk about greed in general. And Jesus says this, "Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." And so Jesus, as he often does, leads into a parable and talks about an already rich man who was blessed by God beyond measure in his life. But then he shows how this man's greed took it too far. And so first, we see that this man who was already rich, let's keep that in mind, was blessed with an abundant harvest from God. We don't see any greed there right away, but that's because God blessed him with this. But then he notices that all the barns he already has that are already full of grain are too small for this harvest he has. So his idea is he's going to build even bigger barns to store all of this grain for himself. And now saving material possessions such as grain isn't bad necessarily, but we see that he already had some saved up for the future. So unless he's planning on saving this for a famine to help out his community when they are in need, why would he need that many years' worth if he knows God is just going to bless him and provide for him in the future? And the man answers the why for us. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. So Jesus points out how greed eventually led to this point. Did you notice that throughout the parable, the man only speaks to himself in the first person? I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And what does that show us? That the man is alone. He has nothing but himself and his barns full of grain around him. Because greed does not like company. Greed does not like anyone sharing in that wealth and in that joy. Greed is all about self-gain. And perhaps this man wasn't always this way. Maybe he had a family, he had friends, maybe he had fellow farmers who worked for him or worked with him. And through hard work, God blessed him with this very successful farming business, but then soon the greed took over. And he pushed away family, he pushed away friends, and pretty soon he was alone with his grain. We see that with Scrooge too, right? His greed led him to this solitary, lonely life, who had no friends, who had no family to love. He just had himself and his money. And so Jesus' lesson for us today is to value earthly wealth properly. Now, first, let's figure out what Jesus is not saying here first. Jesus is not saying that it is bad to have a plan for the future. You put money in your retirement fund. You put money in a savings account just in case of an emergency. You put money in the stock market or maybe in real estate so you know you'll be set in the future. And those are not bad or sinful things, and Jesus is not condemning those things. Jesus is also not saying that it is bad to have material possessions either. All of us have possessions. You are wearing possessions right now. You have a house. You have an apartment. You own a car, or you own a truck. You might have a cabin. You might have a boat or other fun toys. You have everything that fills your house and makes your life enjoyable or pleasurable. You take vacations. You have fun in your retirement. And none of those things are bad or sinful, and God is not condemning those either. So what is Jesus saying? Jesus says, watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. Jesus is saying greed can come in many different shapes and sizes in our lives. and it can tempt us in many different ways. Greed can manifest itself by wanting more wealth in money, wanting more possessions, wanting fame, whatever it is that we may want in our hearts. And greed is sneaky. You don't just wake up one day and say, I'm going to be greedy today, but it happens over time. And it slowly begins to consume our hearts until we push God and family and friends away, and then we fill those voids with money or with possessions. And you may put every single spare penny you have into an account, and it may never see the light of day. God blessed you and entrusted that money to you. Did you use it to bless someone else or to give back to God, or is it just going to sit idle forever, waiting for you to pass on to give to somebody else? You may take the wealth of God that He has blessed you with material possessions and use them for your own enjoyment, and that's great. But are they being used to bless others as well? God has given those things to you out of His grace. What are you going to do with what God has given you? The man in the parable allowed this greed to consume his heart until he had nothing left but his wealth and his stuff. He never thought he was being greedy, but thought, I'm just going to enjoy the rest of my life and not have a care in the world. And how does God respond? Not with a pat on the back, but you fool. This very night your life will be demanded of you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? When God calls someone a fool, it's not to be taken lightly. In the blink of an eye, everything this man has could be gone. Gone in an instant. Then what is he left with? Nothing. He is all alone. No family, no friends, nothing. He could go to heaven and everything he has will be gone because he cannot take it with him. It means nothing in the eternal grand scheme of things. But what God wants for us is to value earthly wealth properly. And how do we do that? First and foremost, we look at the things that we have as blessings that God has entrusted to us. He gives us all we have, and He gives it to us each and every day to bless ourselves and then to bless those around us and to show our appreciation to Him, not just to keep it for ourselves stored away because we just want more. They are blessings from God, blessings that He promises to continue to give us every day of our lives. But we must understand that everything that God gives us on this earth is temporary. Clothes wear down, they tear, they go in and out of style. Your car may break down, it depreciates in value the second it gets off the lot. Your house may be lost in a storm or in a fire. Money can be lost in the stock market, it could be stolen. And we can surround ourselves with all these possessions and all this wealth, but we will soon find ourselves like the man in the parable or like Scrooge. We will be alone with no one around us. When we properly value what God has given us as temporary blessings from God to bless others and to give back to God, then we better understand what we should value above everything else: heavenly wealth and heavenly riches. This sermon will continue next week, where we will look at how we should properly value heavenly wealth. Amen.